All right, guys, welcome back. We are in the security world again with an amazing guest today. Her name is Cassandra Mack, and she is at the CISO level, which is, in my career, been extremely rare for a woman to be a CISO. I've dealt with many security directors, even VPs, but I don't think I've ever met a female CISO. So she's going to tell us kind of what that's like in a very male-dominated space at that level. And she works for an amazing company, Tensorwave. We're going to talk about that as well. Cassandra, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Where do you see the security job space going right now? What technologies would you tell people to focus on? And what career paths are going to be hot in the next, we'll say, 5 years?
Yeah, so I think right now we're looking for people who are trending towards being a specialist. People coming out of these theory-based schools like state education typically have theory-based education, which does not help them in the workplace. And the junior roles are very much disappearing. So unless you got an internship somewhere in your last 2 years where you actually got hands-on experience, most people are not employable coming out of these programs. The people that are employable are the people who are coming from programs that have actual work experience built into the education. So like, for instance, I went to DeVry, which, has a mixed reputation, but honestly, I couldn't have asked for a better education because they tell you when you come in, if you work your butt off, within 3 semesters, we will walk you into a job and you can get an apprenticeship or, whatever's available at the time. But that's exactly what they did. I killed my first 3 semesters. They walked me into a place. They helped me with my interviewing. And there's a lot of schools like this that do that. There's a lot that have actually gone to more of a hybrid model where they're doing theory and they're doing hands-on. But what you're looking for in an educational experience is professors who have actual experience and who are still working in the field so that they can educate you on exactly what you should be doing. And they're giving you more lab time so that you can actually get your hands on the technology. Because if you come to me on a resume and you have absolutely nothing to show for the time that you spent in school, that does not help me to put you in a job where I actually need you to jump in and be able to do something. And I can't tell you how many resumes I get where people just don't know how to do anything and they don't know how to explain what they learned in class because they just learned theory and it didn't make sense to them because they weren't putting their hands on anything. But there are people who come out of these boot camps who have done nothing but lab exercises and try hack me and actual things that help them figure out how to be competitive and how to up their skills on a daily basis. So that's what I'm looking for. Essentially, the junior roles are very much disappearing because we don't have time with the constrained budgets that we have and the constrained team sizes that we have to actually sit down and handhold people to get them where they need to go. Also, I think, we're all trending towards needing to be able to be what I call robot farmers or harnessers of the robots. If you can't use the AI to help you do things faster or stronger during the day, you're just not going to move fast enough. So everybody needs to start trying to use the AI to help them do things faster. So examples of how I use it would be, I will come up with an idea for something that I need to write. So it could be a policy or procedure. And I tell the AI, I don't give it any proprietary information or anything specific to us, but I'll say, give me a policy that's based on what you find on the internet that is written in plain English. It's understandable by a technical person and a business person. That includes these sections and these subcategories. And then I keep tweaking it as I go. And I keep, refining it to what I need it to be. And then I put it in front of people and say, please kick the tires on this and tell me exactly what you think. Tell me if I'm saying that we're going to do something that we can't do or saying something that doesn't make sense for the business. And then we go through several iterations of getting it to the point where it needs to be and then putting it in the right format. But the time savings that I have there from, going from old paper-based copy that's old and outdated to where we need to be now it's hours in each policy that it saves me and each procedure. So, that's just a simple example of how I use it in my day-to-day work. But essentially, there's a ton of stuff on the internet that you can get to that saves you time, and using the AI to amalgamate that and hone it in for, like, for instance, I'll say for an AI infrastructure company. Sometimes I'll say like CoreWeave or AWS or GCP because there's a lot of stuff out there. Same thing with writing job descriptions, right? Like, there's a ton of them already out there that you can utilize to say, give me best practices for hiring a senior security architect. And then you can look through it and see if it makes sense for you and take out the things that you don't need and add the things that are missing. So there's a ton of ways to use the AI, but I do see people using it wrong. I see a lot of developers who are essentially replacing their own personal coding skills with the AI. And that doesn't work for us because you're putting things into the AI that's potentially proprietary and you're getting really weak and lazy with your coding skills. So we don't want that either. We want people to utilize it for maybe writing a snippet of code that you don't know how to write, or in a language that you've never written before, or getting examples of something so that you can then tweak it to make it work for whatever you need. But I am seeing people try to come back with AI driven code that just either doesn't work, doesn't integrate, or is based on hallucination, that then when you try to merge it with production code, it's causing a ton of problems. And most of the managers of those teams know immediately whether you wrote that code, or whether the AI wrote the code based on the quality. And people do end up getting terminated for breaking internal AI governance policies on using the AI too much. So not to go tangential on that too much, but I very much see in the next year heavy reliance on hiring people and training people to use the AI properly, and then going forward moving to automation on anything that we can, because we're not replacing people, but we're essentially getting rid of that junior to mid-level and trying to grow people who have senior level capabilities. And that's really the direction that it's heading in. The junior level is compressing. So you will not be a junior very long, and you will be getting a lot more hands-on education as you go. Very much compressing as well. You'll see junior level roles posted with requesting 3 to 4 years of experience. And what they mean by that is they want to see that you've had hands-on lab experience throughout your education, or you went to a boot camp and then you started getting hands-on experience either as an intern or as an apprentice. And you've sought out those very unique programs so that you can get that. And I can just give you an example. I took an intern straight out of a 4-year college experience, and within a year she was up to mid-level, and then she was promoted within about 3 years to senior, and she just dug in and got as much done as she could and learned as much as she could. And I think that was more being self-driven and motivated. But those are the people who get the jobs now, and those are the people that we rely on to be able to move us forward. We just don't have the luxury of being able to take chances on people who don't have the hands-on experience or the drive or the motivation to figure things out for themselves. And on that, it's really critical thinking and problem solving skills. Those are been in style and been needed forever, and they will not stop being needed. It's essentially, we have to be able to assess in those junior to mid-level people, do you have what it takes so that I can give you instruction and you can go either use AI or use your resources to go and comb through the people that you need to go to figure out how to do something, or how to get the teams together to figure something out. Did I miss anything on that list?
No. I mean, what are some ways that you kind of vet that out, though? So you're dealing with a junior person. Seems like you'll take you'll at least hear someone out, whether they're boot camp trained or 4-year degree trained, and it's more of just kind of seeing what they're all about. But how are some ways directly you kind of get to the bottom of that?
So what I like to see, and it really comes down to whether the school trained you properly on how to write a resume. I can tell you probably 90 to 95% of resumes I get go straight to the never, never. I say never, never land, because they're just going in a bin and nobody ever looks at them again. And those are the ones that are it's an entire page of dump, and you can't tell anything about what they've done, what they've solved. You've just got a giant list of skills, which usually will get you filtered out from the ATS in the first place, or they're using white space, skills to try to trick the ATS, which all those strategies don't really work in your favor. The best thing you can do is go through either your education or your hands-on experience or any of the previous jobs you've had and be very specific about what was the challenge that you faced, what was the action that you took, and what was the result of the actions that you took. Because we need to see, what is the fruit of your labor? What have you actually done? What kind of transferable skills do you have from the experience that you have? So, for instance, I get a lot of people who have worked in either an Amazon factory or they've worked in Walmart, like, typical jobs that you have in college. Maybe you're a cocktail server or a bartender. What have you learned to do there that's going to help you in a job that you're going to take now? And I know their skills because I came from that. I got my first job because I had done problem solving in a Japanese import company for robotics. So I knew technical language. I knew shipping import policy. I knew, how to reach out to companies to get proof of delivery. So there were things that I could point to that were problem solving, critical thinking, follow through. We want to see those kinds of skills that you have so that we can extrapolate, okay, that would be helpful over here. Even though it's not a direct comparison, I can see that you actually can think for yourself. You can go figure things out. You can ask the question behind the question when something doesn't make sense to you. And we need to see that before we spend the time to actually bring you in to talk to you and realize that you're completely not a match for something that we have. So thinking through, like, how do I parlay those soft skills that I have over to something that's listed in the job description? The other thing I see a ton is nobody takes the time to customize a resume for the job description. They're just blindly sending resumes out to somebody on LinkedIn and saying, "Hey, can you get me in the door for this job?" And honestly, I can't pass anybody on to a hiring manager even if they reach out to me on LinkedIn, because I don't know you, first of all, and I'm not going to vouch for you and ruin my reputation if you can't even compare the job description to your resume and make sure it's customized. I will happily pass you along if I can see that you have taken the time to compare your experience to the job description, and you've taken the time to maybe ask me a few questions or somebody else in the company a few questions about the role so that you understand a little bit more before you send your resume off. But, just blindly spraying your resume out into the ether is not going to do you any good.
Yeah, and take that extra minute before you reach out to
Mhm.
someone like Cassandra or even someone like myself. They'll say they're a perfect fit. Okay, let me see your resume. And it's not a perfect fit. Like, why would you not? If you do have these skills, why would you not at least reorganize it on your resume? Right. So yeah. I mean, just take that extra time before you reach out to someone because that is the right thing to do, but you have to do it the right way. So, what about
Right.
from a security? Oh, good.
Oh, I was just going to say, there are ways to reach people to find out more about jobs. And it's not just LinkedIn, because a lot of people don't use LinkedIn. A lot of people have gone away from it because there's just so much stuff coming in that's not related to the job or not related to finding a job. Just a lot of people are creating a lot of content that's not super useful. So, what I found is, unless you're somebody who's trying to advertise your own content on LinkedIn or trying to grow your network or your persona on the internet, a lot of people have gone away from it. So, just sending out a blind email to somebody or message on LinkedIn is probably not going to do you any good, especially in the tech area. So the newer, better way to reach out is, find somebody on the team at that place that is on GitHub or Twitter or X. Find them and ask them some questions, right? Like if you're asking about the tech stack at that company, and they, open up to you, which most of them will happily talk engineer to engineer. They say they're drowning in logs. The job is real, because that is something that really happens, right? And you may not know enough to know that, but if they're just kind of like, "Oh, I don't mind the job, my boss is okay," this kind of stuff is not really helpful. So you need to be good at asking questions to try to get to, real information that would help you figure out if that job is for you. And not being afraid to reach out to people, because people want to genuinely help if they feel that you're asking something that they can answer. Now, if they feel like you're asking something proprietary, they're probably not going to answer you, and they're probably just not going to respond at all. So, be mindful about the stuff that you're asking, because everybody is trained on not giving proprietary information. So you may not get an answer to what is your tech stack, because any security person would know that opens you up to having vulnerabilities known to somebody on the outside who could then try to attack your Apache code, for instance, if they're telling you the entire tech stack. So asking intelligent questions is good, and using a few of these other platforms where people would hang out is really smart.
Yeah. Now, what about from a security tools perspective or security jobs perspective? Obviously, you're kind of going to conferences, networking with your peers that are also like what is something common that these companies are having a tough time finding that maybe someone could get skills in now to then, obviously kind of have a low competition and high pay. What are you seeing there?
Yeah, so I see that people making the mistake because maybe 5 years ago and even 10 years ago, everybody focused on go get these certs. And once you get these certs, then you'll be viewed as ready to have a job and everybody will hire you, right? CISSP is one of them. You go pay a ton of money for a boot camp. It's like $5,000 to $8,000 for a boot camp for CISSP. And you pay $600 for the test. Most people don't pass it the first time, right? So you're spending an inordinate amount of money for a piece of paper that doesn't tell me that you know how to do anything. A lot of the stuff, the content in there is really outdated. So the history of networking, or the history of some security tools, but it's not really relevant right now. So what I tell people is go find labs. There's a ton of online content, videos, labs. Get in there and get your hands dirty so that you can come to me and say, I did this lab and this is what I learned and here's what I know how to do. So if I give you a test of some sort, you can actually pretty close do the thing, right? You may not have put your hands on it in a real live environment, but most of those labs are running actual software that we use or something really close. And it's just like coding. Once you know a language or two, you can code in other languages and learn that really quickly. And that's what a hiring manager is looking for, right? You don't need to know all these coding tools or all these languages. You just need to know something relevant, right? You need to know a Go, a Bash, Python, something like that. Once they see that you know how to do that and you can pass a code test, they feel relatively calm about, okay, I'll take a chance on this person, right? Even if they don't have direct experience. And especially if you can see, I tell people if you're, brand new to security, get in those lab environments. If you tell me that you're top 20% of try hack me, that means something because I know that you're actually using your hands to do something, and unless you have somebody else doing it for you, which doesn't make a lot of sense to actually spend the time to do that. I know that you know something and you actually can come and figure something out. The other thing I would say is if you want to get the certs, get the certs. But just telling somebody that you have a cert is not going to hold a lot of water these days. We want to know, what did you do with that to actually impact either a company or a lab that you're taking? Or, when I ask you a question about, how do you stop a SQL injection in real time? I want you to have enough experience to actually know that. I don't want to see you going to the AI and asking questions or Googling it, right? And we do look for that too. It's okay to, if you're not quite sure, to check and say, I'm pretty sure it's this, but, I'd have to double check. That's okay. We don't need you to know the perfect answer because in real life, we are all going and Googling and checking the AI or checking with another trusted person that we know. So you don't have to have all the answers, but you do need to be able to demonstrate that you've actually done something.
So you mentioned try hack me. Any other recommendations for people to kind of come to an interview with someone like yourself to say, okay, like what are some other things that have made you kind of, be like, oh, this person's
Mhm.
pretty impressive?
I would say if you've got money to spend, any SON cert is very good. Anything that has a lab component to it, where you're being tested on lab, hands-on work. There's some offensive and defensive labs like HTB Academy or Blue Team Level 1. Anything that starts with an O, like OSCP, I'm forgetting all of them, but look for things that have a lab component because when we're interviewing you and we know there's a lab component and you are certified, that means something. If you're just looking at something like CYSA or Network Plus or Security Plus, right? There's no lab component of that. It's just memorization of multiple choice questions. So, yes, we can see that you can retain some data, but it's not relevant to the job if you don't know how to put your hands on something and do something.
Yeah. And then what about like the GRC world? Is that a constant challenge for you guys? I know before the interview, we talked about how it's something that you really can't outsource that to AI anytime soon. When you talk about GRC and some thoughts on those careers as well.
So I've had great luck with hiring people who are either fresh out of a boot camp or fresh out of college who are super motivated and have shown me that they took the bull by the horns. Like one, for instance, was a cosmetologist who kept getting hacked. And she just finally got sick of it and went to school so she could learn more. And I think she got hacked like 4 or 5 times and money was taken. It was really impactful for her. So she decided that she was just going to embark on this journey. And I mean, that impressed me as it was, right? Making a major career change like that with no previous experience and no education to help her make that decision and sticking through it, right? That's the story that really impacted me and made me think, okay, I'm going to take a chance on her. And the reason I say that is in the GRC world, you're not coming out of any school with very much GRC knowledge. They just don't cover very much of it. I actually didn't get any training on that until I went into my master's degree at Keller Graduate School, which is a offshoot of DeVry. And every single professor there actually works in the workforce and they do like the professor thing on the side. I got real hands-on experience with how do you do business continuity and disaster recovery? How do you do business impact analysis? And nobody's coming out of school with that stuff. So you have to look for the promise of the person who can actually grab onto these concepts and do something with it. Now, that said, it takes some time to get them to where they need to be. And if you are experienced in this space, it's not hard to find jobs, especially there are a few certs that actually give you a leg up and can move you from like the mid-level to senior level or mid to manager because we just have so much work to do and not enough people. So that is an example of where like ISACA certs would come in handy because they do have quite a bit of relevance to, just knowing the terms and knowing how the flow of these complicated processes work. So CISA is the auditor certificate, CISM is the manager certificate. Those tell me that you've at least taken the effort because they're pretty significant. It's a 6-hour test and it's testing to see, do you know what comes first? Do you know what comes fourth? Do you understand why we do the things that we're doing in the order that we're doing? Do you understand what is an inappropriate response to an audit question? If you don't have that background, it's very hard for you to do the automation that we need to do, which is pretty much where this field is going. We are automating out the junior to mid-level jobs, and it will be only senior and manager jobs going forward. So there's just a tremendous amount of GRC automation tools that are coming out, and they're getting better and better by the day. And if you look back maybe 3 years, we didn't have any of it. None of it worked. It was all a promise, right? And you'd buy the tool and you'd be really disappointed because it didn't do anything. But now they have embedded AI capability. They have bots that you can set up that automatically collect things from all the places in the company so that you don't have to manually take in the evidence or go ask people for stuff. So essentially, my GRC people have time to write policies and procedures. They have time to go and investigate processes within the company that now need security built into them versus being tacked on at the end. So they're much more moving to a proactive stance versus we do things after the fact, which is a significant shift in not only security, but in compliance. And it's more of a melding of you don't have two separate areas in most like startup to mid-sized companies. You don't move to that separation of risk management, governance, and compliance as a separate department until you're really big. So we have quite a bit on our plates, and you end up getting a lot more introduction, a lot more hands-on in the security world as a GRC person in a smaller to mid-sized company because it's just so they're actually able to spend more time learning things that they didn't know before and adding more value versus spending all their time on manual processes. Like I can just tell you third-party risk management is something that has not been automated very well yet, and the tools are very expensive right now that actually do it, but it's getting better and better and the price is coming down, and it will save probably 50% of one person's job because we have to do third-party risk management due diligence when we bring in a new tool or new software, provider, and then we have to do it annually. And it's pretty significant amount of time. It can take 2 to 3 hours minimal for each one, and we typically get 5 to 10 a week. So you can imagine that somebody is just doing the same thing over and over again. So that is perfect for automation, and that person then gets freed up to go do something meaningful or learn something that they didn't know before and add value versus just, spending their time, spinning their wheels.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me ask you something. Where do you see this security industry going? I mean, you're talking about you know, definitely a lower amount of the junior roles, tougher barrier to entry. I mean, what do you see happening in the next few years with AI? Some people say with AI, there's going to be more need for defense and security. But what are you seeing from your desk?
I think automation is the key. Tools are they're moving away from, I call them one trick pony tools where they only do one thing. And it's really hard for us as CISOs or leads to advocate for tools that only do one thing. We're really moving towards tools that do multiple things so that we can justify the spend and really be able to point to a return on investment for the money. Currently in a startup, in the last probably 3 or 4 startups I've been in, I have to do horse trading. So I have to look at a tool that I've had a year or two and I have to say, is it doing what it's supposed to do? Am I getting out of it what I think I'm supposed to get out of it? Or do I scratch it and I get something cheaper because it can do the same thing now? And then I can take that money and I can put it towards something else. And you also get a lot of scrutiny and security to show that the stuff that you're using is actually adding value because we're not a revenue generator, but we need to be able to point to, hey, we're a revenue enabler. We're enabling these things in the business by doing these things, right? And usually it comes down to compliance, being able to show a SOC 2, ISO 27001, PCI DSS, right? All these certs are desirable by mid-sized to enterprise companies, and we're all looking for those contracts. So being able to get that done really quickly, being able to automate as much of it, and then being able to reduce the drag on your internal infrastructure development and engineering teams is what they're looking for. And there's various other things that the business may be looking for, like driving down vulnerabilities so that they reduce the drag on the teams. Automating, putting in CI/CD pipelines so that you can automate the checks. You'd be surprised by how many development engineering teams still don't have automation in their development pipelines. Being able to be at the forefront of helping them do that and driving the importance of it so that it gets prioritized saves a tremendous amount of time and also helps security because this stuff is actually happening because it's automated in the process. So I think, people just really buckling down and embracing the automation and getting away from being scared of using the AI is really important right now because I see a lot of CISOs that are really stuck on, I'm not going to do this thing because there's too many risks and too many unknowns in the AI world. But if we move away from that mindset and look at what is out there that I can trust, what is out there that I do feel comfortable with, and where can I apply the most, effort to get the most out of it. And I think that's the key. We've selectively chosen our code review software has a lot of AI in it and has a lot of automation. Our GRC platform, and we've been continuously automating, and we've switched out our GRC platform every year for the last several years. As something new comes out, we are not afraid to rip and replace it. But it's in the way you design it and the way that you roll it out to make sure that you have minimal impact to everyone. And then choosing wisely, right? Like You don't want to rip and replace something that has tentacles into the entire organization every year, because the downstream impact of that is everybody gets tired of dealing with it. And so you have to make, really strategic choices as a CISO or a lead, or even, within my team. I tell them, you have to go out and evangelize and socialize these changes and see what the pushback is. Because if everybody's revolting against you because you're going to do something that you think is important but they don't think is important or has too much downstream impact, you're going to start to get pushback and nobody's going to buy into what you're trying to do. So it's really important to be, able to socialize and make sure that you're bringing the business and the technical teams together and being more of like chief storyteller or chief facilitator versus what I would call Dr. No, because you don't want people running away from you or turning the other way or avoiding you because they think you're going to make their life harder or you're going to be constantly telling them and their team that they did something wrong. It's, the shift from that Dr. No mentality to we like security or we like compliance because A, they appreciate what we do. And that's another thing. We started rolling out full appreciation programs. So once we get done with an audit, we celebrate it. We celebrate everybody. We even like 3D trophies for people because we want them to feel like they were part of the solution and not part of the problem. And when they help us, it helps everybody and it helps us get it done quicker because nobody wants to spend months and months and months on audits, especially not your engineering and development teams and not your accounting and finance people that have to provide contracts. It's not an enjoyable thing, but we do our best to try to make it as quick and painless as possible so that they see year over year that we're getting better. And so I think, just embracing the automation, embracing, essentially treating your business people and your engineering teams like somebody that you want to take care of and you want to make their life easier. That mindset shift is seen and heard within the organization, and it really does make a difference.
Yeah. Now, when you talk about your day to day, and maybe it totally varies, is it, potentially some months or parts of the year you're kind of maybe selling some of these new products to the board? Is it getting buy-in from, again, those lower level people? Is it kind of dealing with threats? Like what's your day to day like from the CISO's office?
I was pretty much constantly jockeying back and forth to give everything a little push to make sure it's moving. I can honestly tell you, I go from list to list trying to figure out what's the most important thing every day. And I try to pick 3 to 5 things that are the most important, redo my list. And we've tried various things like Jira boards to Kanban boards to try to put everything in one place and move it along. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. We've tried lists, we're trying to fine tune how we keep track of the work that we're doing. But essentially it's really who needs the thing right now, and it gets shuffled around accordingly. We have 4 people on our team in a company of roughly 150, and we do have security champions and other teams who help alleviate some of the load. But when you're building from scratch, we're roughly about a year and a half in now, but we started with compliance. So we started with SOC 2 and ISO 27001 from scratch, and we didn't have a lot of this stuff we needed. So we were building and auditing at the same time. So essentially you're building for 2 or 3 months, and then you have the auditor check it, and then you hurry up and finish the rest of the stuff that was supposed to be done, which is usually policies and procedures at the end, because you're trying to build the infrastructure and the development stuff that they need and want to see, and making sure your data centers are in check. And then the paperwork kind of gets shuffled to the end. So we just came out of our audit season in early January, and it had lasted from July to January because we were doing ISO 27001 for the first time, and we were doing our renewal on SOC 2. But the company had grown so much from the first SOC 2 to the second SOC 2 that the scope of the audit was so much bigger. So they're, essentially sampling many more employees, accounts, things within the data center that they want to see. So it gets really cumbersome. Essentially, security falls by the wayside in the meantime because you have to focus on that because that's what the board is mandating. Like our ISO 27001 had a hard deadline because we were trying to win an enterprise contract. And if we didn't have it on time, they essentially were going to walk away and go somewhere else. And they were nice enough to let us know that. So we knew what our priorities were. But I'm now playing catch up on security because there's certain things that we just don't have yet. So it's very much a matter of, hey, analysts, please go and research this thing so that we can make a plan and figure out, how long is it going to take and what do we need to ask for? And then, hey, security architect, please go investigate these things in engineering and development and come back and tell me where the holes are, because we need to figure out what does our architecture plan look like. And it's really kind of an ever-changing, ever-evolving thing because the technical teams are moving at lightning speed. We're building data centers in 2 to 3 months, where most of the other ones are 12 to 18 months. So you can imagine, every single area, networking, DevOps, infrastructure, web development, they're all moving super fast. And to be able to keep track of that with 4 people, you have to keep constantly checking in to say, okay, what has changed? Here's what we thought it looked like the last time we looked at it. What has changed here? And even like IT will go to a new building and everything in the building has changed. So now we need to reassess. Like, we're required to do an internal assessment every year as part of our SOC 2 and ISO 27001. And even NIST CSF requires, if you're going to follow the guidelines, that you're doing this. So we have internal assessment that goes on constantly to make sure that we not only understand what's happening, but we're also giving real-time guidance on, hey, you really need to automate this thing because they're going to be looking for that. So they've got enough time to do it before the audit comes, and just continually reminding people to make sure that they need to not lose sight of the thing that they need to do and make sure it's a priority. And then we also have what's called an ISMS plan that comes out of ISO 27001, where you say, these are the things we're going to do as a company. So it could be, here's the KPIs we're going to measure. And we have to constantly go back to the business and the technical teams and say, is this feasible? Is this reasonable? Can we actually do this? And then change it and abide by whatever we've decided. So there's a lot of daily jockeying for position and what's most important. There's quite a lot of checking in with upper management to make sure that, what are the new goals? What are the things that we're trying to accomplish in the business, so that we can make sure that we're aligning our priorities? Because the worst thing is you drift off and you start doing things that you think are important, and then they look at you and say, what are you doing? Right? Like that's not at all where we're going or what we think is important. And you sometimes find that out when you go to ask for money for something and they're like, why are you asking for this? This doesn't make sense. And luckily, I haven't had that issue here because we stay very much in step, and we're still small enough that we have the conversations very frequently. And it's pretty clear where we're going. We don't change our priorities all the time. We're focused on building data centers as fast as possible, giving our customers what they want as quickly as possible, staying within our SLAs. So anything we can do to make sure that that stuff is possible and that we don't get in the way is stuff that's seen as valuable. One thing I do struggle with here and there is just getting to what is the tool that we need. So we jockey a little bit back and forth on how much open source should we have, because we have a very technical team who's very capable, and we can do a lot of open source. But sometimes you have to figure out, is it better to do commercial because it's going to be maintained better because they have more resources to put toward it. So there's a lot of conversation around, I know you want to do open source on this because you want to play in that sandbox, but how much time is it going to take you to do that? And how much time is it going to take you to maintain it? And then when you're ready to move up security architect and train an engineer to do this, how much time is it going to take versus the other things we want them to work on? So a lot of conversation goes on in terms of like setting something up versus maintenance, and how much money is it going to cost, and really looking ahead to scaling and getting to enterprise. Where are we going? What are we trying to do? And what does it need to look like in 3 to 6 months versus 9 to 12 months?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you answered some of this question in last answer, but I mean, what generally keeps you up at night from, obviously you're the head of all security at the company. So what consistently is a fear of yours?
Okay. So what keeps me up at night is potentially missing something. I have this fear of, my number one fear that I always tell people is becoming obsolete. The second, which I'm always learning and trying to do something different so that doesn't happen to me. But I also worry about getting distracted by the minutia of the day-to-day and having somebody either on the board talk to some other security person and come back and say, well, why aren't you doing this thing? Because it seems like something you should be doing, right? So I'm always constantly going to like CISO society events and all of my peer groups to make sure that we're checking in and making sure that I'm getting their feedback and their viewpoints to just keep our program as up to date as possible. So what keeps me up at night is having somebody on the board or somebody else in executive management come to me and say, why aren't we doing this thing? And it typically comes in the form of somebody that's a technical person talks to somebody on the board, or they hear something on the radio or a podcast or something, and it sends them to for alarm fire, and they get super worried about it. And then they come to us and say, well, what, are we doing this? Or why aren't we doing this? Right. And so I'm always concerned that I'm overlooking something, or there's something new and different that came out that's a threat to us that I just don't have visibility to. So I lean pretty heavily on my peer groups that I go to, which is I'm in a Carnegie Mellon group for executive CISOs, which I get a ton of information from. The CISO Society is a really big one. I think it's roughly 2,000 CISOs in there. So we have a Slack group. We post our issues and concerns and questions, and people respond right away. So it's really helpful to for anybody to seek out those peer groups and free groups and get on Slack channels so that when you're trying to go through something and learn something or solve something, that you have people that you can rely on, that you feel relatively comfortable. Usually I'll take 2 to 3 inputs and I'll take, the amalgamation or the middle of those. And then I go talk to my tech people and say, hey, is this something we can do? Is this something we're worried about? Do we have pieces of this and not all of it? And kind of kick the tires on it and figure out if it's something that we really need to do or not. And most of the time they'll tell me, oh, we've already got part of this. We just don't have this part. Or it makes no sense for us to do that because we're already doing compensating controls like this, and this. And you'll find most of the time your tech team does a pretty good job, because if you're educating them little by little, they're getting better at thinking about security before they're already done doing something. But sometimes if you come into a newish company with lower level developers and engineers, they don't know anything about security. So you have to gauge the level of the people that you're working with and tailor your communications to that.
Yeah. Yeah. And one question I really like to ask, especially people like yourself who are obviously in the career, but on top, you have your finger on the pulse of the industry and technology, right? How are you using AI in your personal life? And also, has there ever been an interviewee that gave you an answer and said, wow, I never even thought about that as far as using AI?
So far, I haven't had anyone shock me or slump me on the AI, but I have observed people using it in interesting ways, just observing what they're doing. And that was kind of how I figured out I should be using it more for just everything that I'm using. I have done some dabbling with making videos. And so taking an idea, turning it into a script, and then turning it into videos, which we're experimenting now with doing our own security awareness videos, because we found we're paying thousands of dollars for really stale content on most of these platforms. And we've got really smart people here. So I don't want to keep giving them the same things over and over again because they'll completely check out. Thinking about how to use some of these tools for things that we're already doing to save, even if it saves a little bit of money, it also gives our team experience doing something with the AI that could be fun and changes up their day a bit. Like, it makes me feel happy when I can actually learn something new and do something and it has a cool output. So we're trying to replicate some of these deepfake videos with our C-level people right now to make it fun and interesting for our employees to be able to just feel like it's something new and different and kind of be maybe a little bit amazed by. We keep telling them about deepfakes, but I don't think they believe it until they actually see it. And we haven't had any issues with anybody getting tricked by deepfakes, but I do think it's coming, especially because we have C-level people that will call us in an emergency and say, please go change this thing in a system. And it would be disastrous for us if they called the wrong person and that person had, essentially root access to something and did something really quick that didn't make sense. Now, hopefully they're going to do a sanity check on something that someone's asking for, but sometimes you don't have all the context to be able to make a good decision, and you could get tricked and do something that would be really impactful. So, I'm always looking for people that are doing things new and different. And I do think that the really young people that are coming out now are going to have more of that because they're raised with the AI and they've been using it more. But a lot of the people that were pre 2 to 3 years ago, they just weren't using it and they're still a bit afraid of it because everybody bought into the hype of AI is going to replace your job, or AI is, so untethered and so ungoverned that it's super risky for you to use it, which I'm not really on that camp. I'm more of a, the AI is stupid and you do need to manage it and you do need to tell it what to do, but it's up to us. If we're not doing that, that's on us. We can't blame the AI for that because people are behind it. So yeah, you're not going to just plug it in and turn it on and let it do whatever stupid stuff that it can do. You need to fully understand it. You need to make sure that you put the guardrails in place and you train people on how to use it effectively. And then you keep fine tuning it and tweaking it as you go. And, don't be afraid to rip it out if it's just not making sense and it's just causing more damage than what you thought it would do. Because some of them are real, some of these tools are, people are very good at selling them. And when you get them plugged in, you realize, yeah, no, they don't do what they said they were going to do.
You're the only female CISO I have ever encountered in 18 years in the tech recruitment business. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what that's like and, any thoughts on, how women can get to that C-suite, or maybe some stuff you've noticed that they're not doing or could do better.
Yeah, so I was lucky. I started in the mainframe programming days. And, like I said, DeVry walked me into a job after 3 semesters and I did an apprenticeship and did really well. And I got some really good tips that have kept me going and, did me well the entire time. A few of them were, don't be afraid to go lateral. If you're not getting up where you want to go and you're not getting promotions, which are almost never happen, just so people know. In my 30 years of working, I think I had one promotion. So somebody told me, move every 18 months to 2 years until you get to a senior level. Then they want to see longevity, which is, they want to see 4 to 5 years in every job, but don't stay too long. Once you stay too long, they start to think that you can only do the thing that you're doing and you're in maintenance mode. So you need to be real careful and mindful about what it looks like on your resume, but not being afraid to make a lateral move. So I made several lateral moves. I moved from a programmer to a statistical analyst, then I moved from a statistical analyst to a project manager. Then I went up to program manager. Then I went to risk and compliance manager, right? So you can see it was a gradual up and sideways and then an up and sideways. And then once I got into risk and compliance, I realized there's no chicks here. So I really leaned into all the guys who were happy to see me because there's no chicks in the room. So they're really excited when you come there. There's a lady here. They're just excited to have somebody else to talk to most of the time. And they're really willing in security to help you. And so I just, went under a few people's wings and listened really carefully and tried to replicate some of the successes that they had. And I found that it really helped. But that said, I had probably a year or two into it, I had a lot of imposter syndrome. And I signed up for the Carnegie Mellon CISO program because I wanted to level up, but I wanted to validate what I knew and fill in the gaps and make sure that I was doing the best that I could do. And what surprised me is I walked into a room of about 99 middle-aged men. And, there were a couple people that were minority, but I was the only lady there. And it really freaked me out at first because I thought, okay, no one's probably going to listen to anything that I have to say, or I'm going to feel really small because they're all super experienced. And there were a ton of like FBI, NSA, really high ranking people in the government space, which I didn't know anything about. And, we all feel that they're, up on a pedestal because of just where they are. And what surprised me was they were asking me questions. Once they realized I was working in the commercial sector, they don't know anything about it either, and they all want to move over. When they retire, they want to move to commercial, so they're looking for guidance, they're looking for input. And I just felt like that imposter syndrome completely went away because people were essentially validating, not directly, but they were validating the things that I knew by asking a lot of questions. There was even one day where I was participating in a conversation and people were lining up to talk to me at the break. And it was just so dumbfounding to me that I was like, wow, I actually do know something. And so then I realized like my bachelor's degree and my master's degree, which I had just finished in cybersecurity, really helped me because I knew a lot of things that people weren't getting trained on. They were just kind of stumbling through and figuring things out the hard way. And so I realized, like, latch onto the things that that other people are struggling with, help other people so that you're getting something in return for, what you're giving out. And people are really willing to help you once they see that you're a helper. And that's helped in like the CISO Society and the Carnegie Mellon Group. I still occasionally I'll go to dinners in the CISO world, like at RSA or Black Hat, and there'll be a lady there. And, we're both looking at each other like, we're so happy to see each other. But they're starting to be more. And what I would tell people is, don't be dismayed in the early part of your career as a female or a male, right? Because there are a lot of people who will tell you that, it's really hard to get in and don't waste your time. Go to some other area of IT where there's more jobs. And I would just say, get the hands-on experience. If you're at the point of picking a program, pick a program that is hands-on. I don't want to say too much about like DeVry and Keller, but they are one of the best hands-on programs out there. And they will, when you're done, you will get a job, or probably even before you're done. And they have night classes. So pick a program like that. There's a ton out there, and a ton of schools are switching over to more hands-on programs. So ask the questions. How much of this is lab? How much am I going to get hands-on? What kind of tools are we going to use? And don't be afraid to reach out and try to talk to people who are already in the field to validate that schooling to make sure that you're actually picking a good program. Because people in the field, we can't hire enough people. We can't find enough good people. So you're not going to get somebody who doesn't want to answer you when you're asking a valid question. If you're reaching out with a terrible resume that isn't matched up to a job description, you're probably not going to get much of an answer. But if you're asking something that's going to inevitably help us in the field to get more people and to do less work, people will be really willing to help you.
Yeah. No, it's great advice. Yeah, because I see that all the time as well. Listen, Cassandra, this has been great. Kind of a peek into the CISO's office, at a high level, and you gave some great tips for people that are looking to get in the security space. Thanks so much for finally making this happen.
Thank you. It's great to
Yeah,
be here.
yeah. All right, and then we'll catch you guys next time.